All right. You want to take it away?
Hey, all right. Well, thank everybody. Thank you all for attending today. My name is Dr. Miguel Ceballos, Associate Professor in Sociology and Director of the Ethnic Studies Institute, which I am very happy to announce that has been officially renamed the Institute of Race and Ethnic Studies. Uh, this change was in response to the national support for racial justice and Black Lives Matter protests. It was an effort to promote student engagement in learning, in the learning and understanding of racial justice and social change. The rationale for this renaming of the Institute is that the discipline of ethnic studies is uniquely placed to address issues of race and racism in the discipline itself, as it uh, was born out of protests during the civil rights movement in the 60s, and of the longest and most violent student strike in U.S. history in San Francisco State University and the University of California, Berkeley. The Institute is a key source on campus for engaging in learning about and understanding structural inequality, systemic and institutional racism, social movements, and social justice through activities such as this seminar series and through the Ethnic Studies minor. The minor provides students with a critical understanding of the social, cultural, and historical experience of racial and ethnic groups in the US. We offer a minor to any student, regardless of major, in 6 concentrations, including in the areas of African American studies, Asian American, Jewish American, Latino, Latina, Native American, and ethnic studies, multi-ethnic studies. Uh, in spring, we plan to introduce a new race and social justice concentration. I invite you to consider a minor in ethnic studies. Please see me if you're interested. Uh, this event today is also part of the Institute's fall seminar series on race and social justice that addresses issues that are important and contemporary to help us understand the experience of racial and ethnic minorities today. Today's presentation is co-sponsored by the WCU Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology, the Anthropology Club, the Department of Art and Design, and the Office of Sustainability. We have one more event planned this semester that will be held on Thursday from 3:30 to 5 o'clock. Together with the Frederick Douglass Institute, Lunch Encounters, and the Courageous Conversations, we will present policing and police violence in the Black and Latino communities. It will be a discussion on contemporary policing events, Black Lives Matter, and the historical context of policing. At the end of the seminar today, we invite you to complete a brief feedback survey, which will be available before we close. Thank you for joining us, and I now turn this over to Dr. Michael DeGiovane.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Michael DeGiovane. I'm an associate professor of anthropology here at Westchester University and also the director of our Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology, and also the advisor for the Anthropology Club that, along with, like Dr. Ceballos said, along with the Sustainability Office of Sustainability and Art and Design, and our department has co-sponsored this event. I see Dr. Bradley Flam here from the director of the Office of Sustainability, so thank you very much for the support. And I also have the president of our Anthropology Club here, and I just wanted for him to say one quick word about the Anthro Club, and it'll throw back to me, and I'll introduce Jada. Sorry, we have all these it's a very ritualized, formal kind of a thing here. So, Foster.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. I'm Foster W. Krupp. I'm the president of the Anthropology Club and a senior anthropology student here at Westchester. As the Anthropology Club, we're always very excited to sponsor these lectures and to try to get members and other anthro students involved with community engagement outside of Westchester University. So it's always a pleasure. We like to usually do it in person with the Iron Hill dinner, but just over Zoom is also great as well. So we're excited to listen to our speaker today.
Well, thanks. And I do see, well, I have some alums here as well from the Hi, Taria and Emily, some of our alumni who have come back. So thank you very much. Krista is just coming on. She's just coming on now. I just wanted to give a special thank you to Krista McCullough, who is just popping on. She is one of the co-curators of the Earth Day at 50 exhibition that was kind of postponed because of COVID. And she had initially reached out to Jada to curate some of her works. And I wanted to, so thank you very much, Krista, and thank you, of course, to Jada as well. So I wanted to very quickly begin by noting that Westchester University is situated on Lenape-Hoking, the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Lenape Indians. We pay respect to the Lenape, past, present, and future, and to their continuing cultural heritage and connections with this homeland. And this is, I believe, Native American Month as well, and there's a number of different events going on, so please do check the calendars for that. So I'm really pleased today to introduce Jada Gray Eagle. She is an Oglala Lakota artist, born in Park Ridge, South Dakota, and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where she's, I think, phoning in from today. She's a photojournalist, a producer, a beadwork artist, and a writer. So Jada is a co-producer on the Sisters Rising documentary, which is the story of 6 Native American women reclaiming personal and tribal sovereignty in the face of ongoing sexual violence against Indigenous women in the United States, and has recently received an honorable mention at the Big Sky Doc Festival. She is passionate about bringing awareness to Indigenous issues, especially those which impact Indigenous women. Jada is a Bee Yellowtail collective artist, which features her beadwork, which you can see on her website. Her work, such as beaded earrings, is inspired by her family's usage of color, passed down from a great-grandmother's star quilt color philosophy of using 6 colors or more in every piece. Jada creates abstractions of her great-grandmother's star quilts as fringed earrings with a blending of colors that are significant to her family's legacy as Lakota artists. She is a trained artist. She holds a Bachelor's of Fine Arts, with an emphasis in fine art photography from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And in this capacity, she has photographically documented such events as the protests in Minneapolis that erupted recently after the police shooting of Jacob Blake, and also the Dakota Access Pipeline protests several years ago. We are extremely pleased to have acquisitioned, as I mentioned, a photo essay of the Dakota Access protest for the Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology's upcoming exhibition, Earth Day at 50, Lessons for a Sustainable Future, with a grant from the Institute on Race and Ethnic Studies. So we're really pleased to welcome Jada here today. Thank you very much for being here, and of course for your wonderful art that this other image that I have, I don't know where, I'm like family squares here. This other image here, we don't have it up yet, so I just kind of had to place it up in my office, but some 11 pieces that are really wonderful. So thank you very much, and I'll give it to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that introduction. So I just want to introduce myself in my language. So Hanmadakiape, Matopajuta, Machiape, Jada Gray Eagle, Washitua Machiape Mia. So thank you everybody so much for having me today. I really, really appreciate it. It's super rainy here, so I appreciate that I just get to hang out inside today. I'm going to try to share my page quickly so I can bring up my presentation. Is that showing? Is that okay? Give me one second.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Hold on. I need to put it in present mode before I share.
Yeah, it's always crazy though. And we're trying, I know some other people are trying to get on, so pardon me as I kind of try to figure this out here. There we go. Yep.
Cool. Great. Okay. So some more about me. I graduated from the Institute of American Indian Arts, where I studied fine art photography. And from there, I went on to work for the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. And if you're familiar with some of their past shows, they recently just did a show last summer called Hearts of Our People, which was the largest comprehensive first show featuring nothing but Indigenous women artists. So prior to that show, you know, some smaller shows had been done, but there wasn't ever a comprehensive show done featuring nothing but Indigenous women artists. And I'm really lucky to be able to work and learn through, some of the prior curatorial practices that they had put into place before coming on to work for them as a fellow and learn under them. And one of the projects that I had proposed working on during my time there was to study Indigenous photography. Even at my own school, at the Institute of American Indian Arts, it is very rare to come across Indigenous photography in the curriculum. And that, was really discouraging to me as a young photographer, as a young Indigenous woman, that the people who have done all of this work prior to me had never been uplifted to the point of making it into a curriculum. And so as a part of my fellowship research, I wanted to dive into the archives to see where this work was, what was happening. Was there even past Indigenous photographers? Like I had no clue. And so luckily, but unluckily, I was able to secure that position, but then the pandemic hit. So I wasn't really ever able to go into any sort of archives or anything like that. So all of my research done thus far has been done actually through learning through community. And I will go to the next slide. I first want to ground a part of my research, and I think understanding how photography has impacted the Indigenous community. So this is a Google search that I just did today. I did this an hour ago. And if you notice, out of the 10 photographs shown, 9 of them are of Indigenous people in regalia. And as a young contemporary Indigenous woman, I don't walk around in regalia 24/7. And I really feel like a lot of understanding of Indigenous people is only understanding us through these images that have been made prior, right? Through these images from our past. Like, sometimes I feel like whenever I show up to an institution, people are really surprised that I'm not wearing a headdress, that I'm not in black and white, that I'm not sepia colored, that I'm actually, in color, wearing, what I wear every day. So this is a problem. As you can see, as a contemporary person, if the images shown of who I am are only representative of our past, that really impacts a lot of who we are today. And I think that impacts us in different ways. And there have been several studies done that showcase this and that really speak to how this has damaged us. But some of the ways that I can speak to is, like, mascots are a way that show that, our image has been taken and used against us. Just the readily available opportunity that people have to put us in that way, like to stereotype us, I think has caused a lot of harm. And I think, I really believe that it starts with the way that we're represented in contemporary society. So I wanted to ground, people, because I don't know that everybody understands this. I don't know that, I don't think that maybe this is something that's taught, that, if you Google Native American today, that a lot of our images that are representations are like black and white photos of our past. So I just wanted to talk about that quickly before I jump into my research. And so going into my research, I grounded it in understanding, where photography started in France and then how it made its way to Americas. And some of the things that I have found were that a lot of the ethnographers and anthropologists that had come to America, to explore, were teaching photography as they went. And so a lot of Indigenous folks picked that up. This photograph featured here is of one of my favorite photographers. I actually have a bit of a crush on this dude. His name is Benjamin Helzing. He's a Tsimshian photographer. He's regarded as being the first professional Indigenous photographer. And he opened up his studio in 1899. The thing that I just love and admire about him is that if you take a dive through his archives, he's actually really funny. He he was taking images of white people the same way that white people were taking images of Native American people in that really romanticized stoic way. And I think that's hilarious, especially for the time. But also just the fact, some of his tribe's history was that they were in Canada and they were led up to Alaska by a missionary, and his name was William Duncan, and he was creating, flyers and essentially fundraising to show that the Tsimshian people had stripped themselves of their cultural ways and beliefs, and that they were no longer practicing their ceremonial rites. They were no longer practicing who they were as Indigenous people, that they had become Christians, that they had cut their hair, that they were now dressing it as like the same way as he was. But Benjamin Helzing was creating work that showcased the complete opposite of that. He was photographing his community still practicing their ceremonies, still practicing making their regalia, and still, being Tsimshian people. And I think that that is just showcases the power of photography, because I don't necessarily know or think that a camera is an evil tool. I think that who's behind it is what matters. And I think that there's a lot of truth telling to be done whenever it's more and more different people behind the lens and not just old white men. And the legacy that Benjamin Helzing left for his people is just, it's so incredible and it's so amazing. And something that, I found out in my research was that actually a lot of his images were found in the local dump by a local Tsimshian researcher, and her name's Mikel D'Angeli. And I really want to uplift her and talk about, just her wantingness and her passion to save his work and to talk about it. And the reason that I can talk about it in this way is because of her and the work that she's done. So yes, that is my crush, and I'll go on to the next one. This is Jenny Ross Cobb, and she's a Cherokee woman, and she's regarded as being the first Indigenous woman photographer. And actually some of her pieces were in the show that I had talked about prior at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, at Hearts of Our People. And because, she is the first Indigenous woman photographer, they uplifted her in that way. And so I've also been researching her and her work, and a lot of her work was of, her town in Oklahoma. And they used a lot of her photography to rebuild some of the old structures that were there. And so her legacy as a photographer was in helping, keep that truth of, like her historic past and bringing it up to today. And I also think that that's really powerful and needs to be uplifted. Richard Thrustel is, I think he's the last one I'm going to be, oh no. Okay, Richard Thrustel is a Cree photographer, and he primarily photographed the Crow Nation in Montana. And if we go back to looking at, my first initial Google image search of, Native Americans, and we see the stoicism, I think this is revolutionary that he has a photograph of a Native child smiling in the time that he did. Because just having an image of a Native person is revolutionary, especially for the time. And I think it really speaks to who he was as a photographer and how he even though he wasn't of the same tribe, they eventually adopted him into their tribe. And even though, he didn't come from them, and I think he was part Scottish, I think it really shows like the trust of the tribe in documenting them in this one photo. And he also has like a pretty rich archive of his work, showing things like, people playing games, going into people's teepees during the time, and they were in there and they were playing games and just different things. And it was a really intimate relationship that he held with the Crow tribe. And I think that's also very important for speaking about the time. And these are 3 other photographers that I want to just kind of uplift and kind of show. And so Horace Pula, Dorothy Chocolate, and Owen Sumtewa. I want to first speak about Dorothy Chocolate because she's just, my ultimate favorite photographer. She's from the Northwest Coast Territories, and this piece is specifically titled The Feast. And so during the late 70s and 80s, there was almost like a renaissance of Indigenous photographers practicing and documenting their communities. And they came together to work in a collective called NEPA, the Native, gosh, I'm gonna mess this up, Native Inuit Photographers Association. I think I may be wrong, but it's NEPA, and she was a part of it. And so it was this collaborative collective of American Indian and First Nations photographers coming together, and they used to do critiques of each other's works. They would trade portfolios, they would trade prints, like just a really rich uplifting of Native and Indigenous photographers' work. And I think that's also really important to talk about the history of photography, because the ability, like, if you listen to them speak, you can hear a lot of the roadblocks that were placed on them during the time of the 70s and the 80s. And some of like what people had told them was like, oh, nobody cares about documentary photography anymore. Nobody really cares that you're documenting your own community, like, all of these things. But I mean, we all know that's a lie, and we all know that's gatekeeping. That's gatekeeping people documenting their own communities because of this lie that journalists and photographers kind of keep to themselves, that they're unbiased. So I really admire them and their push and their ability to keep creating work, even though broader society didn't appreciate them, because they also left these really rich archives for their community to appreciate and to know and love what they were learning about and seeing. Oh no, okay. So I can get into my own practice. So not only am I a researcher at the MIA and looking to create this potential exhibition, going through this comprehensive timeline of Indigenous photography, I'm also a practicing photojournalist. So I am a full-time photojournalist, and I work at the Sahen Journal. And I work there through a program called Report for America. And Report for America is a program that places emerging journalists into newsrooms that are telling undertold stories of America. And so my beat is that I cover the refugee and immigrant community within the Twin Cities. And that is primarily speaks to the Somali, the Hmong, and the Latinx community. But I also do quite a bit of freelance work where I cover the Indigenous community. So this portrait in itself is covering the Line 3 campaign or the Stop Line 3 campaign in Minnesota, which is a pipeline that is being proposed that would go through the heartlands of the Dakota and the Anishinaabe people. And whenever I say heartlands, I mean that it would go through their wild rice beds. And if you are aware of, the Anishinaabe and the Dakota people, wild rice is their staple. It's their food that is like their cultural life way. And the way that they harvest it and the way that they prepare it and everything is all of, you know, these things that they've had since time immemorial. It's a really beautiful process. And so the like this pipeline coming through would be very detrimental to them. It'd be very detrimental to their culture, to their food, to everything. So there's been a lot of campaigns led by Indigenous folks here in Minnesota to put a stop to it and to protect their Indigenous foods. So I was involved with photographing that campaign for a few years, but then I went back to school because you should go back to school and graduate. So and that's what I did. But these are, you know, some more of documenting Indigenous resistance. So the two on the side, I believe, is now in the collections at Westchester, which I'm very proud of. But those are from Standing Rock in my time there, and in the middle is from, it was a memorial that was being held for a young Native man that was killed by the police in Wisconsin about 4 years ago. His name was Jason Perot. But to go back to talking about my time at Standing Rock, so I was actually a student whenever I went out there. And what we had done was we had raised funds to bring a bus of us to Standing Rock and to spend a week there. And we raised funds to bring art supplies, and we taught painting while we were there. So we had a painting camp. And I also sent along one of the paintings that was gifted to me by one of the kids. So we taught youth how to paint, and, you know, we invited everybody to paint. So there's actually adults joining us too. So I can't primarily say that it was a youth painting camps, but during our time there, we were teaching art, and I was not on assignment. I didn't have any relationships with editors or anything. I was honestly just walking through because I wanted to document this really beautiful moment, because as a Lakota woman, to have this be happening on Lakota territory was just really special. And it really meant a lot to me to witness that in person too. I was having a lot of feelings at the time. To be able, like, to watch my people kind of like start this global, you know, revolution and movement was just, I couldn't be more proud. And so just having that opportunity to go there and to document that, not for any publication, but for myself, I look back, you know, about how brave I was in that moment, just to go up to people's camps and be like, hey, what's up, you know? Like, I mean, I still kind of can't believe that I did that, but I did, and I'm really proud of these photos, and I think these photos are something I'm going to be showing for, you know, my whole life.
Can I just cut in for half a second?
Yeah,
So
go for it.
this is one of the photos, right, of the teaching?
Yes.
And this is I guess the camp where they were doing it, correct? I think.
Yeah, well, okay, so that's one of the that it's really funny because there was a hill above Standing Rock called, everybody called it Facebook Hill, because it's the only place you could get signal. And so us art students went there and we set up our camp on Facebook Hill, and everybody teased us the whole week. They're like, of course you artists have to set your camp up on Facebook Hill because you always have to be connected. So that's what that photo is.
And this is, I think, what you were talking about, right? Too.
Yeah, that was gifted to me by a young girl after she had painted it.
It's great. Thank you for lending.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and she was like telling me that was a water spirit, actually, that was protecting the water.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah, it was a really special moment.
Sorry to cut you off and
it's fine. So I also just kind of want to talk about, like, you know, some of my more recent work, not from years ago, but this is some of the work that I've done documenting the community in Minnesota. And, you know, we've been really going through it here. It's been just in really intense summer, after the killing of George Floyd. And I started as a full-time photojournalist 5 days after George Floyd was murdered. And so I didn't really, get to document some of the really intense moments of what was going on, but I've definitely been photographing the aftermath. And I think that was more my speed currently, because as a relatively new photojournalist, I'm not competing with like the New York Times, or I'm not like competing with the Washington Post. So this image up to the left of, the young couple embracing was actually at a rally that was going on because of the Cup Foods is the store where George Floyd was murdered, and they are the ones who called the police on him for supposedly having the fake $20 bill that eventually led to his death. And they reopened during the summer back in August, and there was a protest about it. And maybe people didn't hear about that, further reaching than Minnesota, but it's still been pretty intense here in terms of protests going on almost every weekend. For a long time it was almost every day, and then now it's gone to almost every weekend. But this couple that's embracing, the young woman was actually friends with George Floyd. And she was, in a moment, with the store owners, like, and so I was there with a writer, and we were documenting, what was going on in the community. The picture below with the young woman drinking the soda pop, she is a business owner. She's El Salvadorian, on Lake Street, and Lake Street was one of the most hit places during the unrest. And her store was, vandalized, it was ransacked and everything. And so I did a piece where I went through and I interviewed immigrant business owners, and and their takes on what had happened. And she was able to fundraise enough to get a food truck, and so she's posing in front of her food truck, and so that's how she was able to make it past what had happened. The woman on the right with the Oromo flag, she is a part of the Oromo community out of Ethiopia. And this past summer, one of their most revered artists, Hanchula Handessa, was murdered in Ethiopia. And so a lot of the youth activists here in Minnesota took cues from, the Black Lives Matter movement and from, everything that happened this summer. And they started shutting down highways as well to raise awareness about the human rights atrocities that were going on in Ethiopia. And so I sat down with five Oromo youth activists to talk about like why they were shutting down the highway, like what was going on in their home country, what did they want Minnesota to do, and just talk to them. And then the lower photo of the girl with the megaphone, she's from the University of Minnesota, and she's leading a campaign to get the University of Minnesota to just defund the campus police, all like just completely, like they don't want campus police on their campus anymore. And so that's kind of the work that I do, day to day. It's pretty intense. I'm pretty tired a lot of the time. But I photograph during the day, and then I research at night. And then whenever I'm lucky enough, this next slide, I get to collaborate with a lot of my friends. So I'm friends with a lot of artists because of the school that I went to, and just in my life. And, I get to collaborate with a lot of them. And so two of my friends, they actually own Shy Natives, which is a lingerie company owned by two Native sisters. But I get to collaborate with them pretty frequently. I get to collaborate with one of my friends. Her name's Maida, and she does a lot of work towards empowering and getting fair pricing for Southwest-based Indigenous artists. And then this photo is of Shondine. She's a hoop dancer. She actually works for, I always say this wrong, Cirque du Soleil, as a hoop dancer, and we did a photo shoot for Indigenous Goddess Gang, which is an online publication. And so this is like my way more chill work, like, and you know, I don't get to do this quite often, but when I do, I feel really empowered that, you know, my friends and I, we get to work in collaboration with each other and uplift each other, because being an Indigenous person, you know, we're so stoicized, we're so romanticized, we're so set in this past, and we're not always resisting, we're not always fighting. There's also a lot of beauty in our lives. There's a lot of culture. But yes, I think, did I talk? I did it. I talked for 30 minutes. I can't believe I did it. Oh my goodness, my last series. I can talk about this too. So this was my graduating series, and it was based off of, so my mother worked as a drug and alcohol counselor on our reservation back home in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. And she really always wanted to do a series about the women of our tribe. Because she said that they had like just the most incredible stories of just that were just so rich in culture and strength and everything. And these are stories that, you know, you never really get to hear or see in mainstream media. And so I took this idea and I went running with it. And it's my graduating exhibit. It's titled Wea, which is the Lakota word for woman. And the reason why I wanted to use the word Wea was because it's not encompassing of societal like female norms. It actually has a deeper meaning than that. It's representative of we and Ia. So we means like, it's like the sun or like the moon. It's like a really bright light. Ia is rock. And the reason why they put these two words together to represent women, it's because it's like the most stable and everlasting like power within like the earth. So it has nothing to do with like, you know, oh, I'm a woman because of my anatomy, you know. It doesn't have anything to do with that. And I wanted to leave it open. I didn't want to say this is for women. I wanted to say this is for Wea, because I wanted to encompass our trans community, our two-spirit community, our non-binary community as well. And you know, people who identify with like feminine power. And so what I did was I went through and I traveled throughout North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, and I documented Oceti Shakoi women, which is women that encompass the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota tribes. And I interviewed them, and I created a questionnaire with my family on everything about, you know, their family history to what it means to be a Lakota Wea or Dakota Wea. And yeah, no, we ultimately created this series, and something that like ended up happening through this series was that a lot of women showed up with red. So if you see the overall series, there's a lot of women that show up red. That was a happy accident. And something that I learned in that is that I really changed my language when I approached photography. So I realized that, you know, in terms of cameras, that a lot of the terms are associated with weaponry. So instead of asking women if I could shoot them, I asked if I could create with them. I asked, you know, if I could make their portraits with them. Or, you know, I really am cognizant about the language that I use when it comes to photography. And I try not to say, you know, like, oh, I'm gonna capture you or anything like that, because it's tends to be really violent. And I think that really feeds into the work a lot of us make as well. Like, I think you can be like the most nonviolent photographer, but if you approach somebody and ask them to shoot them, like what kind of mindset is that putting on the person you're photographing? It's not a good one, right? And then the last part of this series is that I really wanted to approach it with collaboration and consent. And so I asked the women how they wanted to be represented. I asked them to work with me on how they wanted to be photographed. So to bring items that were special to them, to bring, you know, whatever it was that they felt was representative of who they are in this moment, but also to be aware that this isn't like the one portrait that's going to make or break them. This isn't the portrait that's going to like be who they are forever. It's just in this moment, because that's what photography is. It's not going to, you know, cement us all the time. It's this like ever growing revolutionary thing that's always growing and moving. And so a lot of women brought their mothers, which was really cute. Or they brought, you know, cultural items like beaded earrings or shawls or different things. And I thought that that was really super beautiful. And I'm really proud of this series. It's like my proudest body of work so far. So there, now I really spoke for 30 minutes.
That's beautiful. So I have maybe a couple of questions. You know, part of this this talk is coinciding with my museum studies class, and of course we have a museum studies minor as well at the museum at Westchester University. But we were just discussing decolonizing the museum and Indigenous co-creation. And I'm wondering if you could maybe speak for a little bit more about maybe what sets Indigenous photography apart. I know you did talk about this, but like kind of like, how do you decolonize the museum? What does that mean? You know, like how does that, in the practical sense, how does that get set apart from mainstream works, for example?
Yeah. So I think, like I said prior, where I'm really lucky to be working with the team that I am that had worked on something prior to creating in community. And the curation process that I'm doing and approaching is working and honoring the people who have done it before me and putting them in a position to collaborate with me to make big decisions and to, you know, like say that I'm not the expert, although I'm co-curator and I am somebody who's very passionate about this and has spent, you know, the past year researching it. That doesn't, you know, I'm a guppy in terms of all of this. And I'm always reminded of that whenever I go into the museum. Last time I went there, you know, we're not working in the museum right now because of COVID, but last time I went in there, I ran into somebody and he was just like, oh man, I'm really proud that you're doing this. He's like, but you're a guppy. He's just like, I've been working at the museum longer than you've been alive. Which is fine. Like I appreciate that. I appreciate being reminded that I am a young person. But yeah, I think just really honoring a lot of the work that has been done prior and not putting myself in that position where like, oh, I'm the expert. You know, whatever I say goes, because I can do that, but I'm not gonna do that because that is not honoring who I am as a Lakota woman, and it's not honoring the Native community for the work that they've done prior.
Yeah. I know, Brian, you have a question?
Yeah, I find it fascinating the way you elaborate on working with the people that you're taking pictures of, and how you explain the problematic language. And when I'm thinking back on things, whenever I would get like a picture for the school yearbook or a family picture done by a professional photographer, they had complete control of like my pose, where I was standing or sitting, what direction I was looking at, so on and so forth. And it sounds like you do the exact opposite. You work with the people and to make something that is uniquely theirs as it is. and also that, to me, that just sounds so much better than like the the hyper control that some professional photographers have.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah. And you know, and I think I try to practice that quite a bit, especially when it comes to not only my professional work, but my personal work. You know, I'm always challenging my editors, like in terms of photojournalism, like, well, why can't I do this, but why can I do that? Because I feel like a lot of it goes back to power and control, right? But I don't think that somebody behind the camera has to be the ultimate one who's in power or the ultimate one who's in control. I think it can be collaborative. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Awesome work.
Any other questions? I know that you had some. Yeah.
I actually do have a question. First of all, I want to say I love your work, of course. I was wondering, I kind of think that there's this big social media movement kind of for Indigenous activism. And I was wondering if you believe that as well, and if it's had any impact on your photography being shared, or how you just perceive like social media within this movement for Indigenous rights.
Yeah, so I think that that's pretty fairly new in terms of you know, uplifting. Like I think during the George Floyd protests, I think whenever people were uplifting Black photographers during that moment, I thought that that was really beautiful and so needed and so necessary. But I also know a lot of, you know, one of my mentors is a Black woman photographer, and she did not want to photograph the protests.
Yeah.
And that's fine, you know, like I couldn't photograph the protests because I don't have the right safety gear, like and I didn't feel called to actually photograph the George Floyd protests in itself. So I think that that's pretty fairly new. I think that during the time of, you know, whenever I was photographing Indigenous resistance, I don't think that that was the case. I think it was still, you know, uplifting and parachuting primarily white photographers to cover Standing Rock. If you look at the archives of Standing Rock, it's mostly white photographers covering it. And the community like wasn't uplifting Native photographers specifically, and it wasn't uplifting Native filmmakers specifically. And so I think that's something that a lot of the communities have learned from the George Floyd protests, is like how important that is to maybe perhaps get somebody from that community to understand the nuance and the nuances that happen during those times of resistance.
Do they play out aesthetically in the types of images that are captured if you are from that community and you have that nuance there, do you think?
Yeah, I honestly I think so, you know, like I think that, you know, in terms of my own photography, one of the things that I did specifically within my own series, like for WIA, was I had every woman close their eyes. And the reason why I did that is because eye contact isn't something that Natives do. It's not a part of our culture. It's actually seen as being disrespectful for a lot of, you know, Native culture. I guess I don't want to speak for all Natives, but like primarily, you know, in mine, you know, growing up, you made eye contact with an elder, they would put their hand over your eyes because it's seen as kind of like aggressive. And I remember sitting and listening to my grandmothers visit with each other, and they would close their eyes. And so I knew that those women would be telling their stories, you know, intimate pieces of their stories. And I always looked at it as them closing their eyes as a form of like protecting themselves while they were telling their stories. So I knew that this series was going to be seen by a larger like non-Native audience. So I had them close their eyes. And that's just something like aesthetic for not only like cohesion, but something to honor our cultural lifeways. And I think there's little things that you can pick up from Native photographers and their different aesthetics that are something similar to that like speak to the understanding of those little details of understanding like the culture. So yeah.
I have a question. Here, I'll turn my. Okay, so I'm wondering is so when you walk around and you're doing photojournalism, and are you talking to people? Are you really communicating with people? And if you are like doing that a lot, do you feel like that impacts your photography that you're doing? And do you think it impacts the subjects in the photo?
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes I don't have the time to talk to every person because I'm only one person and I'm the only photojournalist at my paper. But whenever I do have that moment to actually sit and talk with people, I do really try to sit and talk with them and understand their story and know who they are prior to photographing them, because like I really like, just as a Native woman, I've been taught to work in reciprocity, you know, like for me not to just take. That's not the way that I was raised, and that's not like my cultural upbringing. And so I really try to work in reciprocity and you know, storytelling and conversation in the way that I was raised is a form of, you know, honoring somebody and is a form of reciprocity. So yes, I really do try to sit and talk with people, especially when I'm working on my own stories. Before I even bring out a recorder or before I even bring out a camera, I think it's really important to actually talk to people and tell them my intentions and set those first and be like, this is the piece that I'm working on. This is, you know, the writing that I've done. This is the research that I've done. This is why I'm interviewing you specifically, and this is what I hope to get out of today. And I don't know that that's like, maybe sometimes I think journalists, so I didn't go to J school, I didn't go to journalism school, and so I'm always like pushing the boundaries, and I think I make my editors a little nervous, but that's okay, that's why I'm here. So that was a good question, thank you.
Thank you.
Is it okay if I say something?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
How
I
you
just want
doing?
to say I'm fine. First of all, I just want to say I'm a huge fan of yours. I changed my schedule to come see you and everybody else here. So I am so glad I got the chance to actually talk to you. I'm about to cry right now. But on that note, my question to you as someone, I don't consider myself a photographer in any means. By I mean, I'm more of a beginner, but I have done some photography and freelance work on my own. I know like the last time my fiance and I, we went to La Push out in Washington State and they have rules when it comes to photography. So my question is, have you ever experienced anywhere, wherever you photo that had like rules and restrictions for you as a photographer you had to follow as you went around?
Yeah, all the
So like, how
time.
did you were able to, I guess, not persuade someone, but say, is it okay if I do X, Y, and Z without incriminating on your space?
Yeah. So I actually went to the Tewa Pueblo out in New Mexico. And one of my friends is from there, but they have pretty strict photography regulations. Which is completely and totally understandable whenever you learn about, you know, like the past harms that have been done with photography to Indigenous nations. But again, I mean, I think it's just rooted in conversation and rooted in intentions. So I think just like setting your intentions with whoever's in charge of the photography. So we had to go to the community cultural center and tell them like what it was that we were doing. Um, and like they were fine with it. They were like, oh, okay, cool, great, good job. um, but I mean, again, it's just about being very clear about what you're doing, communication, and setting your intentions. And I'm always questioning myself, like, is this really necessary, right? Like, is this really needed, like for my storytelling and for my my own photography? And I mean, I've been working on series for years. I think it's takes a lot of patience to be a photographer, and so I mean, like, just trusting yourself and trusting the process is, I think, just like the best advice that I could give. So
Right. Another comment too is I also appreciate the fact that you were one of the few people who actually noticed that over years. Like I watched a photography documentary on farming in the United States because my family is predominantly Black, Native American, and we actually have documents. We have tribal members who actually have when they get their photo taken, there it's always in black and white. It's never like what we actually look like. So I appreciate you saying that because when you actually look at our family photos, it's the total opposite of what, let's say, like we have our family meeting. The newspaper will come and always have everybody's having like in a circle or something like that. Versus if you just took a like a barbecue setting, it's very more relaxed. Everybody's smiling. No one is stoic. So I really appreciate you bringing that out because I'm so glad because most people always look at I think our two families together as like being stoic and very sad looking, but when you actually see the real pictures behind it, you see what people actually look like. So I appreciate you saying that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And I think what I like too, about your presentation and everything, especially how you started with, and we didn't talk about, but anthropology has a very close relationship with photography. We have, what is his name? Edward Curtis, who would pose Native Americans in the beginning of photography to kind of make these very idealized and anachronistic, kinds of representations in the idea of salvaging culture that is being lost. And I love that that especially through the collaborative and a consensual approach, you're saying, look, nothing's being lost, right? This is how we are now. This is how you are now, and you should have a hand in representing who you are. And I think that's really important, and it gives a nice, interesting juxtaposition to kind of the very historical idea of the white anthropologist photography of these of different peoples.
Yeah, and I think another thing that I want to say about Edward S. Curtis's work, and I really try to never
Talk about it.
talk about him, but when I do, let me go off.
Yeah, right.
Is that he erased signs of modernity within the portraits that he would take of Indigenous folks. Like he would erase, there's very clear indications of erasing clocks and umbrellas and, and it's like, what truth is that? What intentions is that? Like, I mean, he very, like he thought of a title of his work and he really went for it. The Vanishing Race, like,
And we did that, anthropologists had done that, even in their ethnographies, in the way that they documented. They wouldn't talk about kind of the interactions with the American government or with tourists or something like that was changing culture. They just kind of tried to keep this very museumified kind of approach to like the rituals and everything else. So I mean, I'm saying this primarily for the students to understand that there's a deep historical connection that, of course, that you're pushing back against in many ways.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask two questions about two images that are my favorites. Can I ask this from
Okay.
you?
Yeah, go for it.
What is happening in this picture? He watches over us.
It's actually kind of funny. So there were a bunch of young men having foot races.
Oh yeah, this one. Oh good. See, they're connected. That was the other question I had. This one?
Yes.
I love this one. I don't know why I like this so much. I really like it. I don't know. But
it was a great moment. Yeah, so there was young men just, racing through camp in the middle, like right towards evening, like right before everybody was going to eat together, because every night there was a community feast. And the woman was like, she was calling the races, she's like this grandma, and she's like, she was like the flag race lady. And I loved how she was standing there, like, so, like in such a matriarch type way.
Yeah.
And calling the races and especially with the two men watching on the horses nearby.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the story behind that one.
So I think, you know, what I liked about this photo series that we're displaying, that we're exhibiting, is that there's that the power, the protest images, and then there are all these images of other things, you know, like that are woven in, but like the foot races and the teaching father painting with his daughter. Can you maybe speak for, I know we're almost out of time, but a little bit about this interesting mix between the very political tensions that are coming on, you know, we have speakers and things like that, and then the life going on as well, simultaneously.
Yeah. I mean, so I think just the setting of the camp was very political, right? Like just the setting, like with people with their signs outside of their tents and everything, and the upside down flags and the tribal flags being flown, but it was also like people were living there. Like, I mean, it was a community that had come together and were living there at Standing Rock together. And so, I mean, like I had said before, you know, like although a lot of the mainstream images that you see of Indigenous people are of us resisting, like there's also other things going on, like foot races, like horseback riding, like cooking together, painting together. You know, it was people still living their lives while resisting this pipeline. And that's what I think what was so beautiful about Standing Rock was that, you know, people had made that decision to go and to move and to live there. And I almost went and I lived there, but like my mom chewed me out and was like, don't you dare. You need to finish school. So I did. But yeah, I mean, I think just knowing that people were living there and knowing that protests really take it out of you. And so just being able to live a beautiful life outside on the land again while resisting is I think speaks to a lot of like those more intimate moments.
Right. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any other questions or comments? I know Dr. Ceballos is going to, there it is, put up the link for to fill out the survey in the chat. So please do take a moment to do that. That helps with the Institute's planning, but also ours as well. Any other questions or?
I'm just a little curious. Sorry, I keep talking.
No, it's great.
Okay, I'm just a little curious, like about the media more and like how you feel like that protests and events aren't getting maybe the recognition they need, because I recently heard about in Nova Scotia, the Mi'kmaq First Nations, they're having their 1752 treaty. They're having a lot of issues with that where like the government and there's a lot of people going against them trying to take away their rights that they have that were granted to them in the treaty, and then they're pushing back. And I just heard about this, but I'm not seeing a lot of coverage of it in the United States and not a lot of people know about it. So I'm just curious like how you feel that things aren't getting pushed out where they should be, and also like is there stuff going on now that we don't even know about because it's not in the media? Like, do you know about this stuff, and like how do we find out more information about what's going on that's not being in mainstream media?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I am familiar about what's going on in up there in terms of like the lobster, like it's like the lobster fight. I personally think that media fails a lot because they're such a gatekeeping institution that has really until very recently worked to uphold white supremacy for a lot of communities. Growing up, I very rarely ever seen my community covered in media unless it was, you know, people who were going through afflictions or focusing on, you know, the poverty that happens within my community. And that's really unfortunate because I think it made me really self-conscious growing up as a Lakota woman. I can, you know, say that now that media had a really big impact on my self-esteem. Because it's like I grew up in a primarily white community in Minnesota, but the media and the way that people reacted to the Native community was always like a very negative view, you know, like people always brought up, oh, alcoholism or drug addiction or whatever. And it made me feel like, oh, that's like the only future that they ever see for me. And that's in large part due to media. And so I grew up, you know, and I wanted to be a photographer. And for a long, long time, I was told I couldn't be. I was told that that was something for old white men. There was never going to be room for me to be a photographer. So I've been pushing back. I've pushed back all this time. And I'm gonna keep pushing back because I think that the media needs to become more diverse and know about these stories, because I'm sure that there's many people in different newsrooms who have no idea about what's going on up there, like because they don't have friends in those communities, they don't know. And so it really is media's own fault. They've built this really gatekeeping type of community where it's only if you're, you know, a white person coming from a very affluent family and college that you're ever going to really get a chance to work for these major media houses. And I know that they're working on changing that now, but I mean, come on, it is 2020. Like, come on. Like, try harder, you guys. Like, there's so many more rich stories outside of, you know, like the white push nuclear family that they always try to push. And I feel like personally, like just working within the immigrant and refugee community, there's so many rich stories out there. There's so many untold stories. Like, it's just like we need more diverse storytellers is essentially what we need.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, the irony is it's getting more concentrated as you're kind of the different news, you know, monopolies are starting to even monopolize the local news programs, are buying out all the local news sources. So you're really getting those very streamlined, you know, standard kind of stories. It's actually getting less localized and diverse, you know, as it moves through.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's good that you're fighting that, because someone's got to, you know, someone's gotta go against all that.
Yeah, I need more help, because I cannot say how much I really dislike. So I have like my straps with my cameras that I show up and I'm the only woman, I'm the only brown face there. I'm like, come on, guys. I need more like diversity, you know, because we shouldn't just be experiencing the world through the white male gaze. Like, we really shouldn't. We have such a richer community than that. You know, like everybody, like we need to uplift everybody who wants to do this work, not just one person.
I think change will come. I think
Yeah.
I think it's going to take a little bit, but it seems like it's going in that direction.
Yeah. True.
And so what advice do you have? What advice do you have for me as a white male running a museum? But really, what are your thoughts, or what kind of advice do you have for decolonizing the museum, decolonizing these kinds of exhibitions? We talked a little bit about decolonizing journalism, but you know, in terms of how we approach showing, you know, exhibiting diversity, exhibiting different viewpoints, are there any kinds of things you'd like to see? I'm not talking about us, obviously, but also just in general, the major museums that still have a real big issue with diversity, let's say, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of, you know, white people in positions of power really need to educate themselves on a lot of like the racial injustice and inequality that has been done to people in this country. And there's a lot of material out there for that. And you know, just in my own capacity and in my own time, like just working at a museum, like I mean, I think I had no idea that there was never a comprehensive show done on Indigenous photography prior to this research that I've done. I had no idea that was even issue or a problem, but it makes so much sense with going back and learning what I had at the Institute of American Indian Arts. And so I think just like making more space, you know, and working towards uplifting, you know, communities of color, because we are doing the work and we are putting in the work. It just needs to be recognized and uplifted. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions? Well, we really want to thank you so very much for being here. I think it was a great talk, really informative and very inspiring. I don't know, Miguel, you want to say anything? I know Carla, Miguel, a lot of people had posted about how inspiring this was, and
Yeah,
we really
thank you very much. We really appreciate you being part of this series. And this really goes back to spring, right? When we first talked about bringing your work here, you know, talking with Michael and then actually having you come to speak in fall. So we very appreciate.
some good comes out of COVID, I guess, so we had
right.
time to you know, kind of get in touch with you and everything.
Yeah, for sure.
If I can share the screen for the there's a QR code for those of you who would like to take the survey, rather the feedback survey, and who have a cell phone, who want to take a picture of this QR code. Here's the place we can click on it.
There you go.
You can see it. Okay.
Well, in the meantime, thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here. Any questions? You can obviously contact me or Jada. I can put you in touch with her.
Yeah. I also just want to leave it open. Like
Yes.
I'm a completely open person. So if you feel like you want to ask me a question, not in a big group setting, I'm totally here and open to that as well. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank
So
you.
can I put any student in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. I'm going to end this so that we can.
Alright, bye. Thank you.
Okay.
You
Thank
did.
you.
Thank you so much.
A lot.